Okay, so you shared a fascinating piece on communication styles in relationships. And what's really cool is that it's laid out like a podcast plan.
Yeah.
Like we're getting a behind the scenes look
Yeah.
at how someone else would tackle this topic.
It is quite intriguing.
Yeah.
I'm always curious to see how different minds approach the same subject matter.
Yeah.
This plan sets up a core debate between open dialogue and silent understanding
Right.
as relationship communication styles.
And I think anyone listening can relate to that.
Yeah.
Those terms immediately spark questions.
Yeah.
It's not just academic jargon. We've
No.
all experienced both in
Yeah.
our relationships, right?
Absolutely.
But the source makes a strong case for open dialogue right off the bat.
Mhm.
They're all about clarity,
Yeah.
reducing those frustrating misunderstandings
Yeah.
that can erode trust over time.
And I think the reason that clarity builds trust
Yeah.
is the vulnerability it requires.
Mm-hmm.
When you're open, you're essentially saying to your partner, this is me, flaws and all.
Mm-hmm.
And that can create a sense of emotional safety,
Mm-hmm.
leading to deeper trust.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's not just about avoiding arguments.
Right.
It's about fostering that feeling
Yeah.
of being truly known and accepted.
Absolutely.
But the source also highlights the emotional connection
Right.
you build through open communication.
Yeah.
When you share what's going on inside, you're inviting your partner into your inner world.
Mm-hmm.
And that level of intimacy
Yes.
can be incredibly powerful.
It's a contrast to just assuming what your partner's thinking or feeling,
Right.
which, let's be honest,
Yeah.
can often lead to misinterpretations and misconnections.
Totally.
Open dialogue can help bridge that gap.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole issue of conflict resolution.
Yeah.
We've all been in relationships where things fester
Right.
because no one wants to rock the boat.
Mm-hmm.
The source argues that open communication is often the key to addressing issues before they blow up.
And they suggest we brainstorm real-life examples to bring this to life. What comes to mind for you? Think about couples who have navigated tricky situations by talking it out, preventing resentment from building up.
Oh, I know tons of couples like that.
Yeah.
It's almost like they've developed their own language for conflict,
Uh-huh.
respectful, direct,
Yeah.
but ultimately aimed at understanding each other's perspectives.
Right.
But now I'm curious about the other side of the coin.
Okay.
The source also dedicates a whole section to the allure of silent understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to admit, there's something romantic about just getting each other
Yeah.
without having to spell everything out.
It taps into this fantasy of effortless connection, doesn't it? Like you're two halves of the same whole operating on the same wavelength.
Right.
And, for some couples, it actually works.
Totally.
They thrive on that intuitive understanding.
The source even argues that silent understanding can sometimes lead to less conflict. Maybe you're more willing to let little things slide
Right.
because you sense your partner's intentions are good,
Yeah,
even if their actions weren't perfect.
exactly. And for some,
Yeah.
that unspoken communication can feel safer than constant verbal processing.
Mm-hmm.
It allows space for internal reflection without feeling pressured to share before you're ready.
But as much as I love the idea of effortless harmony,
Yeah.
the source does acknowledge that silent understanding isn't a magic bullet for everyone.
Right.
Individual needs and personalities come into play, right?
Absolutely. What we're seeing here is a spectrum,
Right.
not an either situation.
Yeah.
And this ties in perfectly with your desire to understand the nuances of this topic.
Mm-hmm.
There's no single right way to communicate in a relationship.
100%.
Yeah.
And the source emphasizes that context matters.
Yeah.
Sometimes a heart-to-heart is crucial.
Right.
Other times, a knowing glance might be all you need.
Absolutely.
The key is finding that balance. And I think that's where things get really interesting for our listeners.
Think about your own relationships.
Right.
Have there been times when talking was absolutely essential
Mm-hmm.
versus times when you simply knew
Yeah.
what your partner was thinking or feeling without a single word being spoken?
Right.
This is where the source's ideas start to feel incredibly relevant
Yeah.
to our everyday lives.
Totally.
It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. It's fascinating how this source material being structured like a podcast plan mirrors our approach to these deep dives.
Yeah.
They emphasize storytelling, real-life examples, listener engagement. It's all about making this information not just understandable, but memorable and applicable to your life.
It's like we're on the same wavelength here,
Right.
striving to make these complex ideas resonate with you on a personal level.
Totally.
And one thing that really struck me about the source
Mm-hmm.
is their exploration of the potential downsides
Oh, yeah.
of relying too heavily on silent understanding. It's often romanticized.
Yeah,
But let's be honest.
right.
Haven't we all fallen into the trap of assuming we know what our partner's thinking,
Oh, all the time.
only to be completely off base?
And that's where unspoken expectations can really backfire.
Mm-hmm.
You think you're on the same page,
Right.
but you're actually reading from completely different scripts.
Yeah.
It can breed resentment and frustration,
Totally.
especially if you start feeling like your partner should just intuitively know what you need,
Right.
even if you've never actually said it out loud.
Precisely. And that's where that tip from the source
Yeah.
about intentionally creating space for open dialogue becomes so crucial.
Okay.
Sure, sometimes a look or a touch can communicate volumes,
Right.
but other times you need to sit down and hash things out.
It's about carving out time for those conversations,
Mhm.
big or small.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be this heavy, serious thing every time. It could be
Right.
as simple as, hey, can we chat about how we're splitting chores later? Or, I had a rough day. Can I just vent for a bit?
It's about creating that safe space
Right.
for both partners to express themselves openly and honestly, knowing they'll be heard and understood.
Yeah.
And that sense of safety, as the source highlights,
Right?
is a key ingredient in building trust.
Totally.
When you can be vulnerable with each other,
Uh-huh.
even about the tough stuff,
Right.
it strengthens the foundation of your relationship.
That makes total sense. But I'm also thinking about those times when silence is golden, at least initially. Let's say your partner is upset about something,
Right.
but needs time to process their emotions before they're ready to talk it out.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it's where recognizing those nonverbal cues becomes essential. Maybe they're withdrawn. Their body language is screaming, "Leave me alone,"
Yeah.
even if they haven't said a word.
And respecting that need for space can actually be a powerful form of communication in itself.
Absolutely.
It's like saying, I see you. I get that you need some time, and I'm here for you when you're ready.
It's about meeting them where they are emotionally,
Right.
which can be more valuable than forcing a conversation before they're ready to engage.
This ties back to our earlier question about the potential downsides of open dialogue.
Yeah.
Even though it's generally considered positive,
Right.
what if one partner feels compelled to over-communicate while the other is more introverted and needs time to process internally?
That's a valid concern.
Right.
It highlights how even something as beneficial as open communication can become a source of tension if it's not approached with sensitivity and balance.
Right.
If one person feels bombarded with constant talking,
Yeah.
it can create an imbalance and even resentment.
So it's not just about how you communicate. It's about how you communicate, right?
Exactly.
Being mindful of your partner's communication style, energy levels, emotional state,
Yeah.
it all plays into creating a dynamic that feels good for both people.
And that brings us back to the source's emphasis on really knowing your partner.
Right.
It's not just about surface level stuff. It's about understanding their communication preferences, their emotional needs,
Right.
how they best receive and process information.
Exactly. Some people need to talk things out to make sense of them,
Yeah.
while others prefer to reflect internally before sharing.
And both are perfectly valid.
Right.
The point is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to communication in relationships.
Totally.
It's about figuring out what works for your unique partnership and recognizing that it might even evolve over time
Yeah.
as you both grow and change.
I love that it's not about trying to fit into some predetermined mold of good communication,
Well,
but
yeah.
about creating a style that feels authentic to you as a couple.
Absolutely.
And speaking of bringing you into the conversation,
Yeah.
I love how this source encourages listener engagement. It's like they're saying, hey, this isn't just us talking A2. We want to hear your thoughts and experiences too.
It's that interactive element that makes these topics truly come alive.
Right.
We want to hear from you.
Yeah.
Think about your own relationships. When has open dialogue been particularly helpful?
Right.
And on the flip side, when has silent understanding truly served you well? Your insights and perspectives are valuable here.
You know, as we're unpacking all of this, I'm realizing how much our past experiences shape our communication styles.
Yeah.
If you grew up in a family where everything was openly discussed, that directness might feel natural to you.
Right.
But if your family was more reserved, expressing yourself openly might feel more challenging.
It's fascinating how those early patterns can become ingrained scripts for how we communicate sometimes without us even realizing it.
Yeah.
We carry those patterns into our adult relationships,
Right.
influencing how we express ourselves and interpret our partner's communication.
And it's not about labeling one style as right or wrong,
Right.
but recognizing that these differences exist.
Yep.
And working together to create a dynamic that feels respectful and fulfilling for both people. The
Absolutely.
goal is to find that sweet spot where both partners feel heard and understood.
And that might involve stepping outside our comfort zones.
Right.
If you tend to be more introverted,
Yeah.
perhaps you challenge yourself to speak up more often.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're someone who tends to over-communicate,
Right.
maybe you practice active listening and give your partner space to share their thoughts.
It's all about that flexibility and willingness to grow,
Mhm.
both individually and as a couple.
Right.
And I think the source material does a great job of highlighting that communication isn't about fitting into some predefined box,
Yeah.
but rather about creating a style that's uniquely yours as a couple.
I agree. They present a framework for understanding and navigating these differences,
Right.
reminding us that communication is an ongoing process, not a destination.
Yeah.
It's something we need to continually work at, just like any other aspect of a healthy relationship.
And that effort is so worth it because at the end of the day, good communication is the bedrock of intimacy, trust, connection, and conflict resolution.
Absolutely.
It's what allows us to truly know and be known by our partner.
Right.
This whole deep dive has really underlined how essential clear communication is to a fulfilling relationship.
Absolutely. As we wrap up, I think the most important takeaway from the source and our discussion is this.
Okay.
Pay attention to your own communication style
Yeah.
and be curious about your partners.
Mhm.
Ask questions, observe their reactions,
Right.
and be willing to adjust your approach as needed.
Yeah.
You might be surprised at the depth of connection you can create by simply being more mindful of how you communicate.
Because when both partners feel heard, understood, and respected, that's when the real magic happens.
Absolutely.
That's when you can build a relationship that's not just good, but truly exceptional.